So Judah, the royal tribe of Judah, known today as African Americans. So when Jesus first came, he came just for you. Like he told the woman at the well, or the Gentile woman, he said, I ain't come for you, I came from a lost sheep of Israel. Because if you had proclaimed him king instead of Caesar, then the kingdom of Israel would have been reestablished right there, and the Gentiles would have been destroyed, like God wanted us to do when Moses came out of Egypt. Now you can say, well, that don't sound like God. Why would God want to destroy entire bloodlines of people which are here today? Why would he want to destroy entire bloodlines of people? We have to realize that if we had destroyed those bloodlines when we came out of Egypt with Moses, there wouldn't be trillions of people in hell right now. Yes, those nations wouldn't be here today, but this earth is a temporary thing. All those bloodlines that we were supposed to take out, now trillions, billions, if not trillions of their descendants are now in the pit, and they're going to be there forever. And your soul, your spirit body can't die. See, God's war, he always put the spirit war before the earthly war. So when Jesus came the first time, he died not for the world, he died for your soul, because that's more important. The second time he's coming for the world to reestablish Israel, the kingdom of Israel. I'm gonna go into that in this video. But but the thing about God is he's not going to punish you or condemn you for something you haven't done yet. So he gave you the chance to proclaim him king instead of Caesar. And that's why when he stood before Pilate, Pilate said, you know, your kingdom is, you're a king. And Jesus said, you're king of the Jews. Jesus said, well, if my kingdom is not of this world, if it was of this world, my kingdom will fight for me. So you didn't fight for him. So what happened was, because you handed him over to the Gentiles, that now gave the Gentiles a chance for salvation. This is where Paul comes in with the gospel and taking it to the Gentiles now. So that's what God always does. He takes evil and he turns it to good. So yes, if we had proclaimed Jesus king instead of Caesar, he would have destroyed, did like he wanted to when he first came out of Egypt. He would have destroyed all the Gentiles there. We would have reestablished Israel there. But God already knew that you weren't going to do this. And people say, well, if God already knew, why did he do it? He's not going to punish you for something you haven't done yet. If you make it to heaven and you get closer to the throne than angels that's been there for thousands of years, those angels are going to say, why is he closer to the throne, God? And God's going to say, well, he would have done this, he would have done that. And the angels, like, we were watching him, he didn't do any of that. And God would say, well, I know he would have done that. The angels would be like, because they're jealous too. They'd be petty sometimes. They'll be like, well, we would have done that. No, that's why God's not the only one watching. So God allows things to play out. Even if he knows what you're going to do, he's not going to condemn you or punish you or reward you for something you would have done or should have done. He's going to let you do it. So but he's going to give you the opportunity to do the right thing. So he gave us the opportunity once again for like the millionth time to do the right thing. And no, we handed him over to the Gentiles. That now gave the Gentiles a chance for salvation. And this is where the gospel went to the Gentiles. Right? But God said the Gentiles are not even a drop in a bucket. See, the Gentiles, all bloodlines God knew really wouldn't love him. See, Abraham's bloodline he knew would love him, because literally in your blood. If your earliest ancestors evil, you're going to be evil too. It's literally in your blood. And a lot of people will disagree with that. But just look at today, right? You have a lot of like YT people that say, well, my ancestors didn't I didn't put you into slavery. That was my ancestors. Why should it be my fault? Well, if you look at, there's 10 times more African-American males in prison now than it was in the slave days. So not only have they not stopped it, they perfected it, they transformed it, they made it more efficient, and they made it to where they look like they're the good guys. So that's just an example. You know, there's places where they used to have colonial armies used to come in and put muskets to your face and, you know, destroy your village and take all the women and do things to them and kill all the men and take the kids as slaves. Well, now they got a bank there. And it looks nicer. The bank's made of marble, all that. But now, because if I control your military, if I control your money, I control your military. I control your government. So I don't need people with guns. So it looks nicer, but now they're 10 times, 20 times worse than their ancestors. So that's the thing, is we think we're different from our ancestors. We're not. You're still the same as they, you know what I mean? So the sins of the fathers don't go to the sons. So anyway, so God gave us the opportunity with the Lord to proclaim him king and establish his kingdom. When he came in Jerusalem on a donkey, if we had to proclaim him king instead of Caesar, he would have destroyed all the Gentiles and established the kingdom of Israel right there. But the beautiful thing about it is, because we handed him over to the Gentiles, that now gave the Gentiles a chance for salvation. So, so as the gospel went out to the Gentiles, they came up with a couple lies, and they changed a couple things. So in almost all the end time prophecies in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Isaiah, they all say in the end, Israel is going to be put back on top. And that's hard to reconcile. When now God's given everything that was yours, Judah, Israel, he's now given to the Gentiles. Now the Gentiles are on top. Well, when they're reading in the word that in the end, Israel's going to be put back on top, well, at that time, you got to realize we're their slaves. They weren't going to accept that. They're going to be put back on top. Our slaves? Nah. So they said, well, all these end time prophecies of Israel is a spiritual Israel. It's not the bloodline Israel, it's the church Israel. And then they came up with the whole rapture thing, because you got to realize in all the end time prophecies, it says that Judah, Israel's going back to Jerusalem. The kingdom of Jerusalem is going to be reestablished. And even the gates of Jerusalem are going to have the name of all the tribes of Israel. It's clearly the bloodline. And so they said, well, and they forget about all that. They said, no, what's going to happen is the church is going to be raptured. And they came up with, because Jesus said in the end, he's coming out the sky and people are going to meet him in the sky. But when he's coming out the sky, where is he going after that? He's coming to earth. He's not going back up to the sky. So the people that meet him in the sky are coming back down with him. You know, and a lot of one person in the field, one person not in the field, all that, a lot of that hasn't been unlocked yet. The thing about God is he won't reveal too much of his prophecy too soon because the enemy can get ahead of it. So a lot of the meaning of one person in the field, one person not, a lot of that hasn't been revealed yet because it could hinder God's plan. So that's still kind of locked. But for the most part, it's not what they make it out to be. The whole rapture thing was made by this Catholic monk named Darby, and I'll put it in the comments. All the receipts of what I'm saying in this video will be in the comments. And what he does, him and a bunch of Catholic priests, they saw this young Irish girl, because they're Irish. She was in a trance, like a drugged trance. And all the Catholic priests were surrounding her. And she came up with the whole rapture theology and the predisposition, all that at that time. None of that's in the Bible. Okay, and this was in the late 1800s, so it's not even that old. I think mid to late, not even that old, right? So that's where they came up with that, because you got to realize is that they had to find a way to replace us, and they want to change God's word for them. So also in the Council of Nicaea, the Catholics, they changed Genesis 15:13. So Genesis 15:13, and I got the videos on my page for this. It originally said in both the Septuagint, which is it was the Greek translation of the Bible, the first time the Western world got the Bible through the Greek translation from one of Alexander the Great's generals, like grandsons, the Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch, which is one of the oldest versions of the Bible. It was actually sitting in the Second Temple before it got destroyed. So these are one of the two oldest manuscripts. And in those manuscripts, Exodus 12:40, where it says the Israelites were in Egypt 430 years. Well, it didn't just say that. It said the Israelites were in the land of Canaan in Egypt 430 years. They took out the land of Canaan, because that means it wasn't 430 years in Egypt. It was 430 years from when Abraham came into Canaan till Moses left Egypt. So it's 215 years from Abraham to Joseph going into Egypt, and then 215 years from Joseph to Moses leaving Egypt. So it's 430 years total. We're only in Egypt for 215 years. And the reason why they changed that was because Genesis 15:13 was a future prophecy. Genesis 15:13 says, God speaking to Abraham says, Abraham, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, where they worship wood and stone, and they'll be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. He said, then I'm going to punish the nation they served as slaves and then bring them out with great possessions. And he's talking about America, 1619, 2019. So they knew there was this future, the Catholics in the Council of Nicaea in 325, they knew there was this future prophecy of our slaves being put back on top. And they're like, we can't have that. So he took out in the land of Canaan in Exodus 12:40. So it says the Israelites were in Egypt 430 years. And this is all verified. Also, Paul in Galatians says it was 430 years from Abraham to Moses. And also Josephus, who was a general in Jerusalem when it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. He wrote Antiquity of the Jews. He also says it in Antiquity of the Jews as well. So there's all these other sources as well. It was clear that we're in Egypt only 215 years. So these are some of the things, the changing of Exodus 12:40 to change Genesis 15:13. So you wouldn't know that you're Judah in America, that you're Israelites, and also the changing or coming up with the whole rapture thing. So what happened was, as I said in other videos, when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, you escaped into Africa, West Africa. It became known as Negro land. Now, who gave you that name Negro? It was the Portuguese. Because in the late 1400s, I think 1490 something, Pope Nicholas wrote a decree saying that all black Hebrews would go into slavery. And this is the first time slavery became about race. Now, he didn't say black because there was no race categories then, but he said all Hebrews would go into slavery. And back then, everybody knew he was black. So the Portuguese were the first ones to jump on it because the Portuguese were the first ones to put ports in Africa. Europeans couldn't really go into Africa because it was too hot. There was malaria, all these diseases. They couldn't deal with it. So they had the Africans and Arabs go in there for them and bring out slaves. So they had the slave ports. And they also had the Arabs and Africans make maps for them. And these were the Negro land maps came from. And in some of these original maps, the Sudan is a Hebrew word for foreigners of Judah. You can look it up. Sudan is a Hebrew word for foreigners of Judah. So the Sudan used to be ours, but guess what? The Africans there helped sell us into slavery. Now you see Sudan impoverished and they're at war. Again, there's a genocide in Sudan now. The punishment that was on you is now on them. The Arabs helped sell you into slavery. The Palestinians, they're starving now. I'm not saying you should be happy about this, but I want you to see the connection. Their ancestors helped sell you into slavery. The ones fighting the Palestinians, the Jews, they've done a lot. When you were sold into slavery, their banks were the ones that funded the plantations. They owned the slave ships. When Massa was whipping you, he couldn't keep up on his payments. Guess what? The Ashkenazi Khazarian bankers, they would continue to, even when they weren't making profit, continue to allow these plantations to keep going even when they couldn't pay, because you can't take somebody's identity if they're still around. If you're trying to do identity theft and the person's identity you're trying to take is still running around and everybody knows who they are, it's kind of hard to take their identity. You see what I'm saying? So now the Palestinians, the Arabs that sold you into slavery, the Africans in Sudan have sold you in slavery, and the Khazarian Jews, Ashkenazis, sell you into slavery. They're all at war now. Matter of fact, Ukraine is where Khazaria was, which I'll go into that later in this video. That's where the Jews came from before they got into Israel today, right? So I'll kind of go into that and how they're Esau. So what happened was God knew that you would betray him, but he was going to allow you to betray him, Jacob, Israel. So he already created it. When Jacob was born, he already created another nation that would counterbalance you, Esau. Esau and Jacob were twins. Now just follow me here, okay? It's Genesis 25:25. Okay, Rebecca the twins were fighting in her stomach. She says, I'm gonna get to that, but let me talk about Jesus real quick. So when you had handed Jesus over, right? Now, if you look at in Jesus's time, no, I'm gonna go to Esau and Jacob because you need to understand this and follow me. So Rebecca, she had two different. God says in Genesis 25:25 to Rebecca, you have two separate nations fighting in their stomach now. He later goes on to say, the world won't be able to hold them both. And when they get born, Esau came out red and hairy. Pretty much red is in the Bible means white. He came out white, a whole new nation. They're like, what is this? He was hairy and red. And Jacob came out black like other babies. So there was no mention of his description. But Esau came out. And as he got older, Esau, he loved to kill. He loved to hunt. He loved taking wives from all the other nations, which they weren't supposed to do. Jacob, he loved to shepherd. He loved to be in the tents. He loved to be in the word. He went and lived with Shem for a little while and learned from Shem. And he was still around. So he loved the word. He loved the people. He was a shepherd. And so you had these two. So Abraham, who was still around, was the one to tell Rebekah, make sure Jacob gets the blessing, right? But God says, we'll come around, go around. So Jacob dressed up as Esau to take his blessing. Now today, Esau is dressed up as Jacob to take his blessing. So we don't get to that. So God then says to Rebekah, he says, and listen to this. He said, when Jacob is cursed by God, the younger will serve the older. That means Esau came out first, so he was the older. So when Jacob, Israel, when we're not obeying God and we're under a curse, we're going to be at the top, we're going to be at the bottom, Esau's going to be at the top. And that's the world that we know today. He owns the banks, he owns the publishing companies, he owns the media, he owns the Federal Reserve, the schools. That's why you can't say nothing about him. He's like, he's on top and you're at the bottom and the Gentiles in the middle. See, God would only allow Abraham's seed to rule the world at any given time. So he's going to be Esau or Jacob. Abraham's seed was always going to rule the world. Then you got even Ishmael, who are, the Saudis. That's why they're so rich, because the promises he gave to Ishmael's mother, Hagar. So it's always going to be Abraham's seed ruling the world. But God then says to Rebekah, but when Jacob is blessed by God, the older will serve the younger. That means Jacob will be at the top and Esau will be at the bottom. And that's what happened during King David's time. We was on top. King David, Solomon, Azariah, all the kings of Judah was destroying Esau, and they were at the bottom. And there's actually, and I'll put this in the comments, there's little figurines that was found in Edom. And if you know, peoples usually make like false gods look like them. The nations of the people that make these false gods, the figurines have their faces on them. Well, these figurines, they have a particular characteristic that's only to one group of people today. And I'm gonna put that in the comments, but it's the nose, the way that it's shaped. You're gonna look at it and know who Esau is today. And I'm gonna put that in the comments. So this was the thing. If Esau, you wanted, so what happened was when Jesus was born, Esau was starting to go back on top. And this is where King Herod was an Edomite. It was Esau. So Jesus' time, the Herodian dynasty rose. King Herod, he was over us, and we're at the bottom now. This is when Esau started to take over, and he's been there since then. Well, King Herod, he established Edomite priests. He didn't let the Levitical priests come. He put Edomite priests there. And when Jesus was arguing in Matthew, when he's arguing with the priest said, our father is Abraham and Isaac. But notice they didn't say Jacob. They said, our father is Abraham and Isaac. And Jesus says to them, your father is the father of lies. Now, why would he say that? If he came from Abraham? Because you realize, like God had told Rebekah in Genesis 25:25, you have two separate nations. So Jacob came out black like all other babies. This other nation came out like no other baby. Where did he come from? Well, here's Jesus telling them that your father is the father of lies. We go back to Genesis, where Adam ate the apple. Adam blames the woman. Eve made me do it. Eve says, the snake made me do it. And God says to the snake, he says, your seed and my seed is going to crush the head of your seed. So this is going to make Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9 make a lot more sense. So essentially, what God's saying is that, I'm going to have my chosen people, but in that same womb, God's greatest nemesis, I won't say his name, will have his chosen people. And pretty much they're going to start the same start line, and we're going to see. But when my people wants to act like your people, I'm going to put my nemesis people over you. And so when Jesus is arguing with them, the priests, these are Edomites he's arguing with. Also, Judas, who betrayed him, Judas Iscariot, that's not a last name. Judas was a common name back then. So Judas Iscariot was, to describe him, it's where he's from. Judas from Keriot. Well, Keriot was in Edom. Yes, Judas was an Edomite. He loved the money, didn't he? He always had to he carried the money bags. He loved the money. He's always worried about where the money was going. Yes, Judas was an Edomite, only Edomite disciple. So what happened was, when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, you escaped into Africa, West Africa. God raised eventually Arabs, Africans, and the Khazarians to sell you into slavery. Like I told you, later on in the 1490s, Pope Nicholas wrote a decree making slavery by race, and they went after you. And then, so all these different nations who are warring right now, are their descendants sold you into slavery. Well, what happened to Esau? So Esau, like I said, when he came out the womb, he came out red and hairy, came out white tea. So he escaped it to Europe, because that you're going to escape to where you blend in. He ended up in a place called Khazaria, which today is where Ukraine is. And I put it in the receipts, right? And they were a powerful nation. They were actually the ones that stopped the Muslim conquest to come into the Middle East. They were they're at the Caucasus Mountains. Yes, they're at the Caucasus Mountains on the steppes. It's called, and it's the way from the Middle East into Europe. And the Khazarian Empire was so powerful they stopped the Muslim conquest. They tried to say that Solomon did it because they're trying to hide who they were. Right? They're a very powerful nation. Well, anyway, eventually the Russians kicked them out, and it went all through Europe, and nobody would take them in because they would do things like you would have. Back then, there was a lot of landlords. So you'd have a landlord to have a lot of land. And if you wanted to feed your family, you'd work the land. And the landlord had a lot of land. He couldn't keep track of it. So a lot of times, he paid the people scraps. So a lot of times the people would have crops the landlord didn't know about. Well, here comes Esau, the Jews. They go to the king and the landlord and they say, look, we know about these crops. Let us tax them. We'll be your tax collectors. We'll make sure we get all your taxes. And so they went in and they made sure that the people, whatever hidden crops they had, they found it. They found the money, right? And so a lot of these people end up going into debt. Well, they said, look, we'll give you loans to help you with this debt at crazy interest. And even knights and stuff would do it. And so they would end up having knights and even kings and queens indebted to them. A small minority of people just coming through, kicked out of Khazaria, just coming through Europe. Now they're owning stuff. So the people would just get mad, and the kings and queens and the knights, and they would just, even though now the Jews own everything, they say, we don't care, and they would persecute them and get them out of there and kick them out of Europe. And this is what happened. They get kicked out everywhere they went. So they came up with a way of taking your money without living there, the banking system. They didn't really invent banking, but they took it to the next level. And it was revolutionary at the time. If you were rich back then, you had a lot of gold or silver. If you had to move it from one place to another, you could get robbed on the road. It was heavy. You needed to hire all these armed guards. There's a lot of risk. So they said, look, you give us your gold here in Vienna, and we'll give you this paper certificate. And then you can go to Paris or Germany and pick up your gold there. It was revolutionary at the time. That's how paper money came. It used to be backed by gold. Now it's not backed by gold no more. You used to be able to go into a bank before 1970-something. You used to go into a bank with this paper and get gold for your money. You can't do that anymore. But anyway, so they came out with this. So what happened, they ended up having all the nations indebted to them, right? So Germany started to respect them. They're like, wow, because everywhere they went, they would do kind of like they do now. They would come in, they would only do business with each other, not anybody else, and they would end up kind of taking the wealth, not stealing it, but through economics, they would end up taking over all the industries. And what happened is, what money is, too much circulation makes the price of the dollar goes down, but also not enough circulation, kind of like a heart, not enough circulation makes the dollar crash. So if you got one group of people that has all the money, where everybody else goes into poverty. So everywhere they go, the dollar would crash, their economic would crash. So Germany said, it's okay, we still respect your hustle, come on in. And this is where the Rothschilds established their first banks. And this is where Ashkenazi comes. Ashkenazi is a German word. And the Germans said, come on in. And they did the same thing. They crashed the German dollar. And there's actually, now there's photographs at this time, there's pictures of it, like a whole bin of German dollars, like a whole, like a billion of them was like worth 100 million of them was worth like a slice of bread. They completely crashed the German dollar. So the Germans said, it's cool, we still respect your hustle. We're going to go into other places, take their stuff. And eventually this led to World War I. And the Germans were winning, right? And the guy with the mustache, he was in World War I. You know what I'm talking about. I ain't going to say his name. He was a soldier in World War I. And a bomb exploded. He almost lost hearing in his ear. And so the Germans were winning World War I. Well, Esau, the Jews, they went to Great Britain, who owned the Holy Land, who owned Jerusalem at that time. They had took it from the Ottoman Empire. And they went to Great Britain and said, look, you give us the Holy Land, we'll bring the United States into World War I. And this deal was called the Balfour Declaration. And Great Britain said, okay, you want to, if you bring the United States into World War I, and we was indebted to them through their banking system. They said, you bring the United States into World War I, if we win, we'll give you the Holy Land. And that's what happened. They sunk this ship called Lusitania. They made a lot of Americans think it was a cruise ship, but really it was a military ship that had ammunition and ammo and stuff. And Americans got on it. And even the Germans tried to warn them in the newspaper not to get on this ship. But, they had owned the newspaper, so they made sure nobody in America got the word. And people got on the ship. And the German U-boats, they sunk the ship. And they just found it like 10 years ago. They always said, no, there was no ammunitions in it. Well, they found it like 10 years ago. You can look this up. There's still the ammunition still in there. It was a legitimate military target. Well, so they sink the Lusitania. America was pissed, and that's how they got into World War I. And eventually the Germans lost. So now the Germans, they have to go to Paris to discuss the peace agreement that, it's the end of World War I. They owe billions in war reparations. They're in debt, and they get to the peace conference and they see Esau there, the Jews there, and they say, "What are they doing here?" And then they pull out the Balfour Declaration. "You said we bring the United States in World War I. You'll give us the Holy Land." And the Germans said, "What? You betrayed us over some land?" And this is where the hatred between the Germans and the Jews came from. The Germans call this the Great Betrayal. And so the first thing they tried to do was boycott all the Jewish products, but then the Jews had influence of all the other nations, so they ended up boycotting all the German products. So the Germans had no choice but to let them back in. And so this is how, and I won't go too much into that history, but essentially this is how they got into the Holy Land, and you see where they are today. Esau is now Joseph, it's Jacob. So this is how Esau. Now a lot of Hebrews will say, "Well, all white people are Esau." Not necessarily. A lot of them are Japheth. But the thing about Esau, he loved to take other wives, so he mixed everywhere he went. I'm gonna show that there's photos of Esau and Khazariah drawings where he still had the red hair. When he escaped into Europe, he still had the red hair, but he mixed in with all the nations in Europe. So that's why they got the ethnic looking hair now. They're all mixed in. Matter of fact, a lot of the DNA and geneticists and anthropologists, they wouldn't even classify him as one group of people because they have so many different DNA in them. It's hard to say that they're one race of people. So he mixed in a lot, and that's why it's black hair today. So yeah, his seed is everywhere. But if you want to know where Esau's seed is, look at all the YT nations that are on top. That's Abraham's seed, Esau on top. So he's Semitic. He comes from Abraham, but not Jacob, right? So this is how Esau and being on top. But God says in the end, in Ezra 3:9, that Esau is the end of the world and Jacob's the world that comes after. So Esau's on top at the end, like I said, owning everything, and Jacob's at the bottom, and the ghettos and the prisons and all that. But he said in the end, Esau. And this is the same thing Jacob prophesied on his deathbed, that in the end, Jacob's going to be ruling things. That he told Esau, you're going to be, your brother's going to rule over you. So I'll put it all in all the receipts in the bottom. If y'all have any questions, hit me. Praise God.